December 31st, we set sail from Athens, arriving in Alexandria, January 2nd, 1982, then trained to Cairo, and then trained to Luxor. Luxor is a city on the east bank of the Nile River, 670 kilometers south of Cairo, and is the richest of all Egyptian towns in archaeological sites and pharaonic monuments. According to recent excavations, its long history dates back as far as 3100 BCE, and during Upper Egypt's Middle and New Kingdoms, it prospered and became the seat of government. The Greeks called it Thebes, after the Greek town with which it is very similar, but the Arabs changed its name to Luxor, meaning town of many palaces. We had spent a Saturday on rented bicycles and a Sunday on donkeys on the west bank, visiting the tombs in the valleys of the queens and kings, the colossi of Memnon, and the temples of Queen Hatshepsut and Ramses II, preceded by visits to the East Bank temples at Karnak and Luxor, the Luxor Museum, and before that several days in Cairo at the fantastic Egyptian Museum with the treasures of Tutankhamun, and of course the pyramids at Giza. But Egypt does not only offer historical sites and ancient pieces of carved rock for its visitors to admire. As our donkeys carefully picked their way up the desert mountain ridge, we turned and looked down with awe at the beautiful green ribbon that is the Nile, and its banks stretching across the barren sands. It is a narrow strip of life that one doesn't want to get far away from under the hot afternoon sun. On Monday morning, my friend Jane, myself, and Renee, a fellow traveler from Quebec, were breakfasting Egyptian style on omelets, bread, jam, and tea at an outdoor cafe popular with young tourists. Very likely, we would have returned by train to Cairo that evening had we not overheard the conversation next to us. A friendly Norwegian named Eric was twisting his huge curled mustache excitedly as he explained his negotiations with an Arab felucca sailboat owner earlier that morning to Peggy and Bill, a young American couple we'd already met. For 25 Egyptian pounds on each, Captain Farouk would take 10 people on the 5-day trip up the Nile River to Aswan, the southernmost city in Egypt and site of the high dam at the head of Lake Nasser. Aswan is 210 kilometers upstream from Luxor. Farouk would provide meals and sleeping accommodations on the boat. According to Eric, everything could be settled that day if 2 more people were found. Rene casually offered himself. I was interested, and my friend Jane volunteered ourselves right away, if there would be room. We were invited to meet with everyone involved and the captain on his boat at 1 p.m. When we got there, I was astonished to find how small a felucca is. The Fiala measured 25 feet long and 12 feet at its widest. It had a single very tall mast, an open area in the stern which would be covered with mats for us to sit or lie on, and as I imagined, 10 or even 11 virtual strangers cramped in this small area for 5 days unable to get off, I didn't think it would work. Already at the meeting, besides Eric, Renee, Peggy, and Bill, were Philip, a schoolteacher from France, Art from Nebraska, and Pat, a professional bum from Missouri, and an older Italian couple named Antonio and Angela. They all seemed to think there'd be no problem with space and that we should come too. So before long we were chipping in our deposit to the captain for supplies and agreeing to be ready for departure next morning at 8 a.m. Suddenly I was very excited about the adventure, and we got busy buying our own supplies. We needed liquid refreshments, including water and oranges, toilet paper, and as a precaution we got tablets against diarrhea and malaria. For now we had to worry about contact with the dreaded bilharzia, a parasite that lives in the Nile. Instead of crocodiles, the modern dangers of the river are disease and pollution. Everyone arrived at the boat, but not on time, so we did not get away until 10:30 that Tuesday morning, just as a very old man came down and spoke some final words in Arabic to our captain. "What are you doing with these people? You've never sailed a boat before," interpreted Peggy wisely, amid our nervous laughter. It was Farouk's father wishing us bon voyage. "Goodbye, Luxor," we all waved and cheered as we pulled out. Then we realized there was no wind. We managed to row across the river where there were no docks along the bank, so Farouk and his helper, a local Arab boy, could pole along in shallow water. They chattered away in Arabic until the boy hopped out and waded ashore with a very long rope. It was time for human power. I wondered why these feluccas weren't at least equipped with a very small outboard motor, but supposed that would spoil the fun. The boy pulled us along at a snail's pace until he got tired. Apparently he had never sailed before and became easily disheartened. He and Farouk argued in Arabic until he quit and headed back to Luxor on foot. We all half joked about what he knew that we didn't, and if we'd ever get to Aswan. But Farouk was able to move us slowly upstream along shore alone as children and young girls came down to watch us go by and to call out to us in a friendly way, "Hello, Bakshish, Bakshish." Farouk finally flagged down a tugboat pulling 2 barges laden with sugarcane, factory bound, and he arranged for a tow, so we all got a chance to taste the juicy sweetness of chewy, fresh-cut cane. We cast off near the factory by dusk and tied up, having made 20 kilometers at most that first day. Having stopped at a small village, there were plenty of spectators around as Farouk prepared and cooked supper on his gas burner. Tasty lentil soup, rice with spicy sauce, pita bread, and tea were served up in ample portions, and we ate by lantern light until everyone sat back satisfied. After which Farouk entertained us with riddles and string tricks. We told jokes and sipped a little brandy before snuggling down in our sleeping bags, as the night air became quite cold. Sometimes it kept me awake, but it didn't take long for the morning sun to rise and warm us. Farouk had mysteriously sailed about half a kilometer and picked up a new assistant overnight, so we awoke to greet able young Mohammed, who soon proved he'd sailed before. Everyone had a casual walk and stretch on shore before we set sail. The second day was great, for we had wind. After breakfast of oranges, bread, jam, and tea, we sat back to enjoy the scenery. It was very beautiful and so quiet, only the sound of water against the boat as the farms, villages, with people at work in their fields and gardens, pumping water, women with large baskets or urns on their heads, water buffalo and donkeys in harness, children staring at us from the shores. All this as we drifted by. Although often the scenery was spectacular, with palm trees and desert cliffs, cameras were brought out regularly to record these scenes. Often there were long stretches of the same thing, so that we just lay back and let it pass by. We weren't on a guided tour that had to see everything. We were on a lazy, slow boat to enjoy, relax, and soak up the sun. Some chatted, some snoozed, some read. I remember enjoying Eric's copy of Tortilla Flat by John Steinbeck that day. We were also getting to know our shipmates and enjoy each other's company. Pat, who'd been an upwardly mobile businessman before the desire to travel made him chuck it all, had some very interesting and hilarious yarns to tell about being chased out of Goddard, Kansas, in his slight southern drawl. Somewhere in there, we enjoyed a lunch of cheese, sardines, bread, tea, and tomatoes washed off in the Nile to our unease. The day passed quickly, and by 5 o'clock we made it to Esna, which is 1/3 of the way, and passed through the lock there before we tied up for the night. Dinner again included rice, lentils, bread with a surprise extra of canned peas, after which we all wanted to see the town, so Captain Farouk reluctantly allowed us to go ashore. In one of the small, grubby cafes, trying to be like the very friendly natives as much as possible, Philip ordered the bubbly water pipe filled with tobacco, and we sampled its smoothness. Pat had the very strong Turkish coffee, and I tasted the sweet red Kirkada tea while we played dominoes. For the next day, Farouk arranged a tow from a river research tug, so it was not so pleasant, having to put up with the roar of the engine for most of the day, but we certainly made good time. The sun was very hot this third day, and most of us managed to burn some skin. After the tug had brought us another 1/3 of the way to the town of Edfu and cut us loose as dusk fell, we enjoyed the blessed return to peace and quiet and were able to find a good stretch of sandy beach on an island. The dinner menu held no surprises, and jokes were made about, "Oh, good, rice again," but the food was ample and tasty, if a trifle repetitive. Being near 2 mud farmhouses, a few locals came down to greet us and brought us dry branches for a bonfire around which to visit and keep warm. It was another cold, clear night for stargazing. On the morning of the 4th day, someone brought out a frisbee for our much-needed exercise, and we tried to teach some locals to play until it landed in the river for the second time, and Farouk announced it was time to leave. Mohammed had to pull us to the other end of the island where we waited for the wind. It was a beautiful sandy point, and Renee had the courage to plunge in for a swim. Against the rest of our better judgment, Pat made some cracks about the boat drifting into Aswan with our rotting corpses strewn about it, and the movies Voyage of the Damned and Death on the Nile came to mind as we nervously joked about catching bilharzia. But it turned into another fine windy day, and we were soon moving along briskly. In the middle of the stream, where the current is strongest, the water looks clear enough, although occasionally we saw a huge animal carcass drift by. Again that day, between eating and watching the scenery, we sunned and read, and a few of us played cards. It was so enjoyable, relaxing in this way, that I was beginning to wish the trip would take longer. However, the wind was so strong that final night that Farouk did not want to stop. He made supper while Mohammed held the rudder, and we all bedded down afterwards to watch the stars and bright Egyptian moon, as we sipped brandy and talked. At times the wind picked up so much that Farouk or Mohammed had to scamper up the tall mast and tie up half the sail, an impressive feat in the windy darkness. I enjoyed watching the fantastic night sky and the moon's reflections on the waves. We stopped finally about 2 hours before dawn, and when we arose, it was to the surprising news that Aswan was only an hour away. So after the usual breakfast and tea, I decided to be brave, or foolish, and brushed my teeth in the Nile. Then it was time to pack and get ready for civilization again. Farouk had taken a great liking to Mustache Eric and talked him into making the return trip with him, so it was just 10 of us who waved goodbye to the good ship Fiala from the shore at Aswan. The trip had brought us together, and like a family we stayed together in the same hotel for several days. But Aswan, with its lush green islands and riverside park, fascinating marketplace, ancient temples, and of course the high dam further upstream, soon led us to go our separate sightseeing ways. But not before we enjoyed one big evening outing together. Later in the week, when my pal Jane and I returned to Cairo by train, we agreed that those 4 days sailing the Nile River on a felucca had been the highlight of our winter holiday so far.